in these first two sections, I want to spend 2 weeks talking about why, and then 1 week talking about how. So we spent 2 weeks talking about the why of work. And what I mean by that is my goal in this is to shape some perspective, shape some paradigm. Because if we're ever going to change a habit, we need to change the way we think about that thing. And so for 2 weeks, we've talked about the why of work. And today I want to talk about the how of work. Then we're going to spend 2 weeks talking about the why of rest. And then 1 week talking about the how. So I've given you some questions to think through the how, to give you some handles around this idea that we've been exploring for the last few weeks, but you will not be able to answer those questions here. The best you can do is write these down and take them home, because the average listener forgets what they've heard within 48 hours. Now, here's what I know about you. You are above average. That's why you've chosen New Life to be your church. But that means that honestly, you might remember it for 72 hours instead of 48. You're still going to forget what I said unless you take some notes and ask some questions later. And I would encourage you, ask your housemates, your spouse, your kids, your friendship community circle, some of these big questions. And we're talking about work and we're talking about rest because some statistics have shown recently that 70% of Americans do not like what they do for the majority of their lives. They are disengaged with work. That means 7 out of 10 people are disengaged at the thing that we spend the majority of our waking lives doing. An interesting correlation, 70% of Americans are not getting enough sleep. And so we don't like what we do during the day, and we're not getting enough of what we need at night. And we wonder why we're disengaged and tired and cranky, and it's not just affecting work, it's affecting home and friendships and family and kids. So what I wanted to do is zoom out and ask some big questions about work. Why do we work? And about rest. What is rest? Is it just sleep, or is there something more to it? And we're going to explore that in the next 3 weeks after today. But if you're just joining us, I want to talk about just briefly where we've been so that you can understand where we're going. We started in the beginning of the Bible in a section about origins and how things came to be, to learn about God, to learn about us. And we started in Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to be moving past that today into another teaching in the Newer Testament of the Bible that we'll look at in just a minute. But in case you're brand new with us or you missed something, let me just zoom out and quickly catch us up to where we've been. We started with this, Genesis chapter 1, 26. This is the first time we get an understanding of who God is in relation to humanity. God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the wild animals and over the creatures that move along the ground." And so God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So the very beginning, we see that God made us in his image. And that word image can also be translated statue. And I've shared with us for the first 2 weeks that this guy Moses, who's writing this story or this letter that we know as Genesis, is writing to a group of people who have come out of slavery in Egypt after 400 years. And under the slavery in Egypt, they were indoctrinated with over 1,200 what we call lowercase g gods and goddesses. You and I will call them idols today. Sun god, moon god, rain god, river god. I said there was a god of beer. There were all these different gods and goddesses that were worshipped. And if you went to worship a god, here's something really interesting. Don't miss this. If you went to worship a god, there would be an image or a statue of that god. This would be the Magnum PI god that they're worshiping here. And so you would go and look at the image because the image of the statue would tell you what that invisible God was like. But we said that the God of the Bible created the whole world from top to bottom. He did a complete creative process. And that the God of the Bible is not in one temple or one church, but God's realm is the entirety of the world. And so when God went to make a statue to show the world what God is like, God didn't create Tom Selleck. Well, he did. And praise God for that. But he didn't create a metal statue or a clay statue. Instead, God created people. And he said, "You are my image." Now just let this sink in for a second. What God was saying was, in all the world, whenever you see a follower of Jesus living the life that God created them to be, they are a visible picture of the invisible God. So this is one, but imagine 600 of us. living the life God designed for us to live. That's 600 images or statues, visible representations of the invisible God. He said, you are made in my image. And the next thing that God does is tell the people what work should look like. Why? Because we spend the majority of our waking lives working. And if our job title is image bearer of God, visible representation of the invisible God as God lives inside of us and guides us, then it would make sense that God would talk to us specifically about what work looks like if that's where we're spending the majority of our time. So God tells the people, I want you to work the land. I want you to cultivate it. I want you to care for it. I want you to steward and care for this creation that I've given you. And I want you to, this word work it means to develop it, to bring something out of nothing, to bring order out of chaos, to bring beauty out of pain. I want you to develop and create work. And we said that work is really at its core about finding pockets within our vocation where we could develop and create something beautiful. That phrase, work it, is a Hebrew word, abad, which is also translated 50 times in the Old Testament as worship. So here's something interesting. When we think of worship and we think of just a handful of songs, we're missing the big picture. When God talks about worship, he talks about a life of image bearing at home and at work. So we've been asking if the Hebrew word is abad, work it, which is also worship. We've been asking, how do we honor God with our abad? How do we honor God with our abad? I said to a friend recently, just as a side note, because there is no third service, and I can take all the time I want. I said to a friend, there's that really cheesy Christian line, I worship for an audience of one, talking about God. Listen, I tell jokes on stage for an audience of two. I know God enjoys it, and I enjoy it. If the rest of you want to come along, you're more than welcome. Worship God with my abad. You missed it. That's okay. How about this? You'll probably find this more intriguing because I didn't think of it. There's a novelist named Frederick Buechner, and here's how he talks about work, and it's brilliant. He says, the best kind of work, image-bearing work, is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. Oh, yeah, we all like him. Work that becomes worship, is finding those pockets where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And as I prepared for this teaching series, I read a book called Garden City. And in that book, the author got me thinking about something so interesting. Did you realize there are 7 billion people in this world? 7 billion people. And God, in God's infinite creativity, has created enough space for all of those 7 billion people to express themselves in work in a unique way where their deep gladness meets the world's deep need. I was sitting in a coffee shop over on 2nd Street writing this message, and it got me thinking about coffee. I was drinking a cup of Fairtrade Sumatra coffee, and I thought, think about all the different people who go into me drinking this one cup of coffee. We've got the barista who brews the coffee. They actually roast their own beans right there, and if you love coffee, the smell of it is just, like it seeps in. I love it. I think I get caffeine just from sitting and basking in the presence. But there was the roaster who roasted the coffee. There was the engineer who created the roaster to roast the coffee. There was the person who made the chair for me to sit in, the table for me to write on, the sofas where I'm pretty sure there are head lice all over, so I don't sit in those. No, I love this coffee shop. Not to mention the coffee itself. The coffee itself was made in Indonesia, which means someone had to travel from here to Indonesia to form a relationship with a farmer to strike up a deal to get coffee beans shipped to the Oakland Bay where someone could bring them to the coffee house. But that would never have happened if there weren't people in politics and in education and in pop culture who raised awareness about slavery, because much of the coffee bean production around the world is forced slave labor. And so we had people raising awareness about slavery and coffee and how that works. And there never would be fair trade coffee if there weren't activists and politicians and teachers and educators saying this should not be anymore. So then we've got the person going over, raising awareness. We've got the relationship being built. We've got the boat captain taking the coffee beans to the Oakland Bay. We've got someone unloading it, bringing it up, roasting it, grinding it, just so I can get a cup of coffee for $1. Yes, that's true. I found a coffee shop where coffee only costs $1. And no, I'm not going to tell you where it is. Because my love for you is still increasing, but we're not there yet. I kid. It's in Petaluma. Find it yourself. Shh. Oh, you're listening now. See, I'm so glad you're listening. This is the idea of vocation. Vocation. Vocation is about finding our unique place in this world of 7 billion people because God created all of us, but God created you and knows you and has a plan for you. Vocation comes from a Latin word, and the root of that Latin word means voice. And so vocation is not so much finding the place where you're going to work for the next 30 years, as it is finding that place inside of you where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger, and you find your voice through your work. I love the way that the Quakers say it. Not only do they make great oatmeal, but they have some really good sayings. The Quakers say, I love this, let your life speak. Talking about vocation, let your life speak. And how does our life speak? Well, it speaks when our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger, and we partner together. I want to look at a passage in the New Testament that speaks to this idea, and then I want to ask us some key questions to try to get some handles on how do we figure out our vocation. But I want to give you a warning. When I read the Bible, and this is true for you as well, so you should just be fair warned. When we read the Bible through our unique lenses. So I'm a 36-year-old white dude, pastor, grew up in Southern California, lives in Northern California. When I read the Bible, I have natural lenses on, and my goal is to try to shoot off or at least acknowledge as many of my lenses as I can so that I can speak to us as a community. And I've taught on this passage before, and the reason I say that is I've only ever taught on this passage through my pastor lens. My pastor lens said that this passage is speaking about a certain thing. But when I went back and reread this passage, it's not actually talking specifically about that thing. That thing is encapsulated in a larger narrative. And here's the passage. It's from Ephesians, and it says this. I'm going to start from verse 1 and get all the way down to, I believe it's verse 11, verse 10. But we have to understand the beginning before we can understand the ending. It starts like this. As for you and I, we were dead in our transgressions and sins. Let me just pause there. That phrase sins, if we could have a working definition of it, and let's just kind of tease this out a little bit. Sin is the things that you and I think, that we say, that we do, that hurt us. Come on, hurt those around us. And if we believe that there is a God, and I believe there is, separate us from God. That's sin. And I don't have to tell you what your sin is. That's what you have a spouse for. No, I'm just kidding. They don't have to tell you what your sin is because you've laid in bed before at night and you've thought to yourself, I can't believe I thought it, said it, did it, drank it, smoked it, looked at it, clicked on it, looked at it again, clicked on it again, said it again. And here's what you said to yourself, I'm never going to do that again. Why? Because you knew it was sin. You knew it was sin. Never going to do it again. And then a week later or a month later or a year later, you were looking at it, drinking it, smoking it, clicking on it, watching it, saying it, thinking it. And you thought to yourself, what on earth am I doing? How am I back here again? There's a reason you're back here again. The Bible says that sin, until something greater than that sin comes into our life, sin has control over us. It's part of our nature, and it pulls us away from God. So the very things we don't want to do, we keep doing, and we keep beating ourselves up thinking, why can I not fix it? The answer is because you and I can't fix it. The author says we were dead in our sin on our own. Verse 2, sorry, that's the down part. It gets better. As for you and I, we were dead in our sin. Yeah, we know that. We know that. We've laid in bed. We've thought that. It's the life we used to live when we followed the ways of this world and the rulers of the kingdom of the air. That was the Spirit at work in those who are disobedient, talking about the enemy of God who pulls us away from God. Verse 3, all of us also lived among them at one time. We were gratifying the cravings of our flesh, following the desires and its thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. We had been separated from a loving God. We could not come back on our own to that God. But, I love this, verse 4, but, and that's a big but. I like big butts, and I cannot lie. That's a big but. But if you don't like the way I communicate, man, we're going to talk about grace in just a minute. And there's a lot of great churches out there who their pastor would never say anything like that. But we have a lot of fun. And I'm preaching for an audience of 2. And if you want to come along with me, I'd love to have you join me. But because of his great love for us, my little man likes that. Because of God's great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our sins. It is by grace. Grace means undeserved favor. It is by God's undeserved favor that you and I have been saved, brought back into relationship with God, made alive in Christ. That we have been saved, and God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Jesus Christ, in order that in the coming ages, he might show his incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us through Jesus Christ. It is by grace you've been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves. It's the free gift of God so that no one may boast. Verse 10, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So we were dead, we've been made alive, we've been brought back into relationship. God's unmerited favor has saved us. And then God, with that same undeserved favor, created for us good works to do. Now think about this. We oftentimes assume that God's grace, his favor, is the thing that brings us back to God, and it is, but it does not stop there. It actually flows with us through our lives, and it's God's undeserved favor that had him create in us a place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. Good works for us to do. And here's where my pastor lens always came on. I always read this verse thinking it meant church work, volunteer service. So I preached it talking about good works for us to do in the church, or maybe in the city, but definitely through the church. But here's the thing, he's not actually talking about that. He's talking about a life of good work. Now, I believe service within the church is a beautiful expression of what it means to be the family of God, loving God's people. I believe that deeply. But here's the great part about what he's saying. You and I, even our most committed volunteers in the church, maybe serve 3 to 5 hours a week. 3 to 5 hours a week in the church, and that's great. I love that. But you and I have 119 hours of waking time outside of that. 3 to 5 hours a week. Is that right? Did I do the math right? Maybe. Don't check me. Yeah. We actually have 168 hours a week. I wrote it down. If you sleep 7 hours a night, that leaves you with 119 hours of waking time. Now, if 3 of those are used for volunteering, what do we do with the other 116 hours? If good work is only limited to the church, which I believe ministry in the church is key to showing this world what it looks like to be the family of God. I believe that's key. But if that's the end, then what do we do with the other 116 hours? Well, the author says that it's all good work if we partner it with God. That phrase, handiwork, we are God's handiwork, verse 9, is the little Greek word poema, which is where we get the English word poem. Poem. And our expression of work, because of God's good grace to us, his undeserved favor to us, our work can actually be a poem, a beautiful expression to this world of what our God is truly like. And it's not limited to church work, and it's not limited to nonprofit work. Everywhere we go, we can find these pockets. See, finding fulfilling work is about unearthing the person that God had in mind when God created us. So what I want to do right now is I want to zoom out and ask some big questions. I just want you to write them down and take them home and just ask these questions of yourself, of your housemates, of your spouse. If you are a Jesus follower, ask God these questions. I want to give you one warning and one disclaimer before we jump into these questions. The first warning is this. This is going to feel dangerous to some of us. For some of us, and I want to talk specifically to women who have children under the age of 18 at home. To some of you, and I'll talk about why in just a minute, you might not even right now give yourself permission to ask these questions. And there are a number of reasons why you might not. I want to talk about that. But let me just say, can I invite you, for any one of us, this is a safe place to ask some dangerous questions and allow God to open it up. So that's your warning. It's going to feel dangerous. The disclaimer is this: unearthing takes time. There's a difference between demolition and excavation. Demolition happens quickly, but the purpose of demolition is to tear something down. Excavation takes time because the purpose of excavation is to bring something out. And if you're like me, if you're a type A person, you're going to be tempted to demolish right now. You're going to hear these questions. You're going to think, yeah, I should not be doing the thing I'm doing. You're going to go home. You're going to write your letter of resignation. You're going to turn it into your boss tomorrow. That is demolition. And it falls under the category of unwise. Don't quit tomorrow and then come to me next month and say, Kevin, I need some money to pay my bills. Don't do it. That would be unwise. Instead, go home and simply ask these questions. You've been in this job long enough to know you can stay in it a little bit longer. And allow it to marinate. Allow yourself to crock-pot on the things that God brings up. So dare to dream and slow down. Here's some questions. The first is this: what do I love? In order to figure out where my deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger, I need to ask this question: what do I love? Another way to say this is, if money wasn't an issue, what would be my issue? That's good. That just came out this service. That's good. Joe, you like that. If money wasn't an issue, what would be that thing? If it didn't matter how much money I made, what would be that thing I would do? Here's another question. What do I hate? What makes my blood boil? Or maybe, what is that thing that when I look at the world, I think it should not be this way? Here's what I love. I love the people of Sonoma County. I love the people of Sonoma County. Love us. Well, I can't get enough of you guys. I love it. I love the diversity. I love the way we swing pendulums. Like, we don't have any middle ground in Sonoma County. I love us. Did you know that in Petaluma, in Rohnert Park, in Katati, and Pengrove, there are 112,000 of us? That's kind of our church's general reach. Some of us fall outside of that, Santa Rosa, Novato, but 112 of us. Did you know that of those 112,000 people that live there, 97.5% of us don't know Jesus? When I look at this community that I love, and I look at the fact that 97.5% of us don't yet know Jesus, I think it should not be this way. And I love this community too much to do church like everybody else is doing church. Because there are great churches out here. We're trying to create a different kind of community here that makes a safe place for people to come in who are far from Jesus to experience him. When Pastor Ron started this church, he went to the pastors in the city. He said, I'm starting a church. And they all kind of pulled back because they thought, oh no, another church. And he said, don't worry, I'm not going to fish from your pond. There's a whole ocean in Sonoma County of people who don't yet know Jesus. I'm going to try to reach those people. It's something I love. And the fact that our community does not know Jesus is something where I think it should not be. And you believe it too, or else you would not be here with me. Here's another question. What do you find yourself thinking about, reading about, talking about? We're usually drawn to the things that we are wired for. So what do you read about in your spare time? What do you think about? What are you drawn to? Here's a big question. What am I good at? Verse 10 says, we are God's poem, which means we like it, and on some level, we're good at it. Let me tell you two things I really like and one thing I'm decently good at. You know what I really like? I really like boy bands. No, that's not funny. This is serious. It started in about 5th grade when I first saw Zach Morris on Saved by the Bell. It moved into seeing Dylan McKay in 90210. And then when NSYNC did their Christmas special at Disneyland, I was gone. Justin Timberlake was like, ooh, that's good. I love boy bands. I love it. My big dream was to be in a boy band. Big dream. This is an emotional moment for me. Here's the problem. I can't sing. I can't dance. And I started going bald at 30. Not a good combination to be in a boy band. You don't look around. Thank you, kids. They say, who says you can't sing and dance? You have a very small data window, but I appreciate that. You don't see a lot of bald boy band members. You just don't. I'm no good at it, but I like it. But you know what I also like? I like being in front of people. It energizes me. I like it. I like talking. I like taking big ideas and breaking them down into bite-sized chunks and then trying to somehow package it in a way, promote it in a way, publicize it in a way. Listen, I didn't write the Bible. I'm in publicity. That's all I do. I take what it says and make it marketable. There's no creative ideas here. I love it. I love talking. I love seeing those moments where you're like, oh, and oh. A little bit later, some of you wives are going to elbow your husband. I like those moments. And you know what? I'm pretty good at it. Yeah, you can clap. That's okay. Yeah, I'm pretty good at it. So what are you good at? It's not enough just to like it. What are you good at? Here's a big question. What does the world need? What does the world need? I listened at the Global Leadership Summit to the founder and director of the International Justice Mission. He looked at the world as a lawyer who worked in DC and said the world needs someone to help children break free from slavery, to help the disenfranchised find a voice from corruption. The world needs it, and his deep gladness met the world's deep hunger. Now, you and I can look at that and say, yeah, but I'm not Gary Haugen. I'm not going to go start the International Justice Mission. That's fine. We don't have to think about that. Some of you might be. Some of you might be. But you know what else the world needs on a very practical level? The world needs people who work with integrity. The world needs workplaces that are marked by forgiveness and grace, not backstabbing and water cooler politics. I have a buddy who owns a heating and air conditioning company, and his motto is 100% right or 100% free. The world needs more business owners like that. What does the world need? And the final question is this: can I make a living doing it? In an ideal world, the answer would be yes. And maybe for some of us we can. For others we can't, and that's okay. For others of us, we need to find pockets of places in our current jobs where we are developing, creating, and expressing ourselves. But those jobs really create the space for us outside of our vocation, outside of our paid work, to do the thing we know we were made to do. I saw my friend who was here first service. I said her name first service, and then I remembered she doesn't like being in the spotlight. So I apologized and thanked her for her forgiveness in advance. I have a friend who has a full-time job, and there are pockets in there of this kind of thing. But you know what her heartbeat really is? It's for helping women who have been the victims of sexual abuse. So she volunteers her time for an organization called Verity, which is helping women in Sonoma County break free from sexually abusive relationships and find healing after abuse has happened. I got a buddy, Kurt, who doesn't mind me sharing his name, and Kurt retired recently. He was a fire chief, fire person. He was an educator. He was, and now in his retired life, you know what he does? He drives around a portable shower with the Redwood Gospel Mission. And he says he's so fulfilled. He loves it. He's not getting paid for it, It's what he does over here. My friends Shane and Karen, they work, but about 17 years ago, they walked into our church when we were just starting out and saw that there was no one watching the 2 and 3-year-old kids. So they said, well, this Sunday, we'll just jump in and help the 2 and 3-year-old kids. They've been doing it ever since. He's not going to quit his financial consulting job. And yet, part of the way God wired him is he finds deep gladness in loving 2 and 3-year-olds, helping them know that they're loved and saved and believed in by Jesus and by others. I love it. Think about my sister-in-law, Katie. Katie went to Greece and worked with refugees for a season, about a year. Came back and it wrecked her in the best possible way. Now Katie's working as a part-time barista while she figures out a creative enterprise to raise money to help refugees. So she's working part-time so she can do this other thing that she knows God is calling her to. I've got another sister-in-law named Anna. Anna is a clothes designer. She makes clothes, designs clothes. Right now she works at a fashion house as a buyer so that in her part-time she can build her brand and make her clothes and sell them around the world. Can you make money doing it? If not, find another venue. That's what the Apostle Paul did. He was a church planner. But there was a season in his life where he was not able to survive on church planning, and so he went and started a business where he had the lunchtime off so he could go and speak about Jesus, and he had evenings off where he could go and have these church meetings to plant these churches while working this other vocation. What's your spot? Now, I'm going to beg your indulgence here. I love, and I truly value, one of my highest values is authenticity over polish. I think you know that. Now, if we can do both, I'm all for it. I like authenticity and polish. But if I had to choose one over the other, I would choose authenticity over polish every day of the week. And I wrote this message weeks ago with my questions, and I thought and still think these are excellent questions. And then I came to the Global Leadership Summit on Thursday and Friday of this week, and I heard a woman named Sheryl Sandberg, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. And she was doing an interview, and the interviewer asked her, what kind of questions did you need to ask as a wife and a mother and a woman before you decided to follow this holy vocation that God has called you to? And she listed off some of the questions she was asking, and I had not thought of any of those questions. And in fact, when I sought that place where my deep gladness personally meets the world's deep hunger, this whole set of questions never even came to my mind. And I thought, we need to actually talk about these questions for a minute. So I'm going to ask your indulgence. We're going to run over because I want to have a conversation with you about a whole nother set of questions. Is that okay? So I was thinking about a woman in our church in her mid-30s, and I want to introduce her in just a few minutes. But this woman was working for a national company at their national office when she was in her mid-20s, working for this conference that had 15,000 people at it. And then as she was working there for a number of years, she met a guy, and she was stunned by his good looks and personality. And they fell in love. And she moved with him away from her place of employment to his place of employment in Sonoma County. And she started working with him. And then these two lovebirds got married. And they had children. And when they had children, there was never a conversation about who would keep working full-time and who would go part-time. She went part-time. He stayed full-time. And for the next 8 years, she worked part-time at a local level and then at a regional level. She was moving up, but still part-time, overseeing multi-state conferences, people from California, Nevada, and Hawaii coming together, directing these things. It's clear she has big potential, but was using this much of it in her career because she was watching the kids and doing those types of things. And then both kids started going to school full-time, and she started dreaming about another job. And then she got a job working back for this conference on the executive leadership team for 15,000 people. And here's what this conference is. This conference takes 15,000 college students and recent grads and connects them with 250 nonprofit agencies to send them out of the world, finding their voice in their vocation. And this woman is in charge of overseeing all 215 organizations, nonprofits, bringing them in, setting it up. It's a huge job. And when I had a conversation with this woman about, hey, are you going to take this job? They've offered it to you. It looks amazing. She said, I can't take it. And I want to bring her up on stage because I want you to hear the conversation and the questions she was asking, which are totally different than the questions I ever asked. So would you join me in welcoming my wife, Maria Finkbeiner, to the stage? Nope. Yeah. Yep, it's red.
Well, it might cut me off.
Just like you.
Hey.
Have a seat.
Work it.
So about a year ago, Maria, I want you to come a little closer just so that we can
talk to each other.
Let's talk.
It's getting real.
About a year ago, Maria sensed some of these questions. What is it that God designed me to do? What would it look like for me to go back to work full time? She got offered this position, working with this missions organization in a major executive leadership role, which would be full-time, which has her traveling more than I travel now. And she got offered this job, and I said, that's awesome. Are you going to take it? And she said, I can't take it. And I said, why? She said, because I can't do it all. I looked at the job description. I said, you can actually do it all. Look at this. You were made for this. She said, no, I can't do it all. I said, yes, you can. She said, no, I can't do it all. Which got me asking, what does she mean by all? So I want to ask you, when you were offered this job, what kind of questions were you asking that are different than the questions that I'm asking?
Well, it was can I do all of this? And by the all of this, Kevin needed to understand my laundry list that was going on in my head. Because the all for Kevin was the job description in this one sphere of influence. But I actually am also a mom. And so that job description includes cleaning bathrooms, buying soccer cleats, school supplies, all of this, and cooking and cleaning and whatever. And then also my sphere of influence as a pastor's wife. And I lead worship, and I do this, and I lead women in ministry, and all these things. So I had to broaden. I think some of the questions were like, hey, let's broaden Kevin's mind on what's actually going on behind the scenes over here. And along with the can I do it all question is that what God really wants from me?
But even once you sensed that that's what God wanted for you, you still had this other list of questions. And I want to talk for a second. This is specifically for husbands and wives who have kids in the range where they're still living with you. But it's also for single parents who have a community wrapped around you. It's for all of us to know. Husbands, let me talk to you for a minute. When you started asking questions about your vocation, did you ever ask, yeah, but when we have kids, how am I going to go part-time so I can care for the kids? Did you ever ask, yeah, but when the kids have doctor's appointments, how am I going to get time off work so I can take them to the doctor's appointments? I never asked those questions. I don't think husbands do, because culturally that's not the norm. Now, if you're a stay-at-home parent, husband or wife, and that's a dynamic you have set, that is a beautiful thing. But there's a whole other subsection of women out there who sense God is calling them into something, but you would never ask the question because you have a whole different list of questions than men have. And so you started asking these questions, and there was a lot of fear around it. So what were some of the big fears that you had when you started asking the second set of questions of your all?
Honey, we don't have time to talk about all the fears.
There is no third service. You have all the time you want.
Okay. Some of the fears involved a lot of am I going to fail? Am I going to fail at being a mom? What if that happens? Am I going to fail at being a pastor's wife? What if that happens? Am I going to fail at, this job in general, which is huge, all the failure that comes with that and those types of, lies, really.
Yeah.
That's a big fear. The big fear that I can't hold it all together, there's just those pieces of trying to keep all the plates spinning that were really big, just really big.
And it almost kept Maria from saying yes to this job. Because she just, out of hand, said, I can't do it. Which got us into this conversation. And the conversation included a lot of tears. And
Bawled my eyes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It included a lot of questions. It included a lot of pain. What were the things that in the process of this conversation you realized that you needed from me?
I think I realized a few things when we boiled it down. I realized that I needed partnership from Kevin. And Kevin's a great husband. You have to know, he's kind of like unique in just being awesome. But I realized that it was me producing in our house and doing all these things and whatever, but Kevin was not there producing as well. And I needed partnership. I needed someone to say,
Like specifically, what were the things you needed?
I needed you to go to the grocery store, and I needed you to clean the bathrooms, not every time, once in a while. And I needed you to pick up the kids from school or whatever. I just could not, in my brain, wildest dreams, figure out how to do all of those types of day-to-day, make the breakfast, figure out the meal plan, all the things that we do in our house to keep it running, pay the bills, like all those pieces. I realized I needed some partnership from you.
Yeah, so Maria said to me, I need partnership. And I said, what does that mean? She said, I do, and she had never said this to me. She said, I do all the grocery shopping. I do all the cooking. I do all the laundry. I could tell you the amount of times I've done laundry before this point in the last 10 years because it's easy to count to 0, okay? She did all the cooking. I could tell you at this point all of the meals I knew how to cook because it's easy to count to 3, okay? Here's what I realized in the midst of this conversation. I realized in our house, I was a consumer. At work, I was a producer made in the image of God. At home, I was a consumer saying, what can I receive from my spouse? And husbands, we were not designed to be producers at work and consumers at home. We were actually designed by God to be partners in life and producers in every single place that we find ourselves. And it was a painful realization. So we began this journey about 6 months ago. You went full-time in May. Full-time in May. Okay. Starting in about March, we started having these conversations. And I realized I need to learn because I knew nothing about being a producer in my house. And husbands, maybe you find yourselves here. I knew nothing. I didn't know how to grocery shop. She said, Kevin, it's going to take you 2 hours to do what I can do in 45 minutes. I said, I know, but I have to learn. So she sent me off with the kids and a grocery list because she said, if you're going to learn what it's like with those two. So I did something that I don't know if it's a good choice or not, but I didn't know where things were in the grocery store because I had never been in the grocery store. So I walk into the grocery store. I said, Maddie, go find the onions. Landon, find the bell peppers. Maddie, find the lettuce. And I sent my kids off running like Lord of the Flies. They're like, oh, they were just
those poor
scattering.
Trader Joe's employees are like, what is going on?
It was like supermarket sweep for my children. I wasn't concerned with them being abducted. I was concerned with them attacking people. But I sent them out, and you know what? We came back, and I realized, she'd come back, hey, thank you for shopping. By the way, we don't get organic, we do get organic this, we don't get organic, bananas. I said, that's good to know. Like, spray the pesticides on the bananas, not on the lettuce. Bananas big, lettuce small. Got it. But I didn't know. I didn't know how to cook at all, at all. So I sat down with my iPad and I said, okay, you got to walk me through it. She was like, okay, cook the chicken. I said, no. Break it down. What number do you turn the oven to cook the chicken? She's like, you turn it to a 4. Okay, do I keep it at a 4? She said, no, in 3 minutes, you're going to flip it over and then you're going to turn it to a whatever. And I'm typing this in my iPad. I said, well, is it the same if it's a big chunk as opposed to strips? She's like, no. Less for strips, more for chunk. So I'm writing all these things down because I'd never cooked. I'd never done laundry. I fold laundry, but I'd never done it. So it's like, well, how do I know what goes in the dryer and what doesn't go in the dryer? So we're figuring out a plan. Put a mark on the tag for no dryer. No mark, yes dryer. But in order for Maria to ask these questions, I needed to recognize the fact that I had been a producer at work and a consumer at home, and my consumerism at home had limited my wife from asking the questions of God that I'm asking you to ask today. And I just want to have this conversation because it's easy for me to list off these questions and for us to go home and say, yeah, but I could never do it. And I'm asking us to be a place where we ask some scary questions of each other. Some scary questions.
Can I say one more thing?
You may.
On the other side of Kevin's realization was me and my own struggle for control. Like, I had to be okay with the fact that maybe we'd be eating pink chicken or whatever, you know? Like, I had to be okay with the fact that my shirts got shrunk or, you know, the things that, all those fears, too.
Remember the first time I tried to cook chicken when we were dating?
Oh, yeah.
I called her up because the chicken was on the George Foreman grill. She was in Wisconsin. I'm in California. I said, baby.
God bless you.
Baby. I said, how do you know when it's done? Because I'm cutting into the chicken. I'm like, when there's no more moisture coming out, that's when it's done, right? She was like, no. When it's not pink anymore, that's when it's done. I said, oh, no, I'm sorry. I always cook it until there's no more liquid. For years, I'd eaten George Foreman, no seasoning, plain chicken breasts, dry as can be. So yes, you have to put up with you have to let go of control in order to invite your spouse into production. Because you know what husbands will not do? They will not be vulnerable enough to say, how can I partner with you? If they get criticized continually for their partnership. So I just want to say to you, like, I am so proud of you for asking these questions, for being willing to step out and say, okay, God, I'll try. And it's scary, and it's dangerous, and it brings up a lot of fear in you, and I'm so proud of you, and you're doing great work. And I also want to say, I am genuinely sorry for being a consumer for the first 10 years of our marriage. That's not how God designed us. And I'm really sorry about that. Will you forgive me?
Of course I do.
Okay. Hey, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. You guys. You work it, girl. I'll close with this. Back to my... Woo! Back to the coffee shop where I was writing this sermon. So I finished this sermon. I'm in the last line. I'm literally writing my last line of the sermon. And a gentleman walks in. His name is Bruce. I'd never met Bruce before. Bruce is 80 years old. And there was an empty seat next to me at this little table. And Bruce said, can I sit down? I said, sure. Well, Bruce wanted to talk. So Bruce starts talking to me. So I stop and I start talking with Bruce. He asked me what I do. I said, I'm a pastor. And he leaned in and said, oh, really? Tell me more, which is unique. Because most of the time when I say I'm a pastor, what people hear is me saying I'm a pedophile. And they go, oh, pastor? Yeah, it's true. But Bruce leaned in. He said, oh, really? Tell me more about that. So I tell him my story. I said, Bruce, what do you do? Bruce said, well, I'm retired now, but I spent the majority of my life as the director of the world's largest cruise ship, sailing around the world, making sure things worked the way they were supposed to. After that, I moved to San Francisco, where I worked in San Francisco for a number of years, and then I retired at age 50, and for the last 30 years, I've been doing home hospice care for residents because my heart just beats for people in those last days of life. And Bruce just finished a book with 100 short stories about his experiences in life. And I'm going to see him tomorrow at the coffee shop when I write. And he said he's going to bring me some of those stories so that I can read them. And as Bruce and I finished our conversation, I said, Bruce, it sounds like you've lived a pretty great life. And Bruce said to me, Kevin, life is what you make it, my friend. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Life is what you make it. We have one shot at this life. The average person changes careers 10 to 15 times. Part of the reason they change careers so frequently and dissatisfaction is so high is we never zoom out and dare to ask the big questions. Life is what you make it, my friend. Dream responsibly. Let's pray. Jesus, would you show us that we are safe in our relationship with you? Safe to dream, safe to hope, safe to share our fears. Would you create safety in marriages to have real, honest, open conversations? Would you create safety in our smaller communities, our life groups, and our ministry teams for people to dream and ask questions and partner together? God, would you show us what it looks like, each of us, to find that place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And in those places would work become an act of worship, showing the world a visible picture of our invisible God. We ask these many things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.